Patrick Johnston, I'm going to catch you off guard with this incredibly edgy question that you've never heard before. Technical difficulties, and this is take 5. Patrick, did we ever see this team being this uncompetitive?
No. It was, it's an interesting way to frame it, because this was sort of a question I asked after Thursday's game. I said, the frustration level now, how does that compare with the frustration you were feeling earlier in the year? And in general, the kind of consensus feeling is that, it's just different, that they're not getting results. They're not interested in moral victories. Obviously, they're there to play hockey. They're playing better. But it's frustrating they can't score, that they can't win. Earlier in the year, they couldn't play defense. They couldn't make a pass. That was a whole other level of frustration, is sort of the implication. But yeah, from the outside, I think, let's be realistic. I thought they would be competitive for a playoff spot. I thought that they certainly wouldn't be as strong as they were, say, in the playoffs last summer, and I think there were a lot of reasons why they were strong in the playoffs, partly because of who they were playing, but also they just, they had some depth to their lineup, and they were able to do a few more things than they are now, and it's there's just so many bits and pieces that have added up to flexibility that they really do have in the roster. The sort of scramble that it was to put together some of the depth pieces, signing Travis Hamonic so late. Hamonic is, I thought he was okay last night. I thought he was fine, but that was such an example of sort of how this team's been put together, which is that the budget was really tight and they were sort of forced to make decisions within that budget. Struggled with a lot of those decisions, and the fact that Jim Benning had signed a lot of players to contracts that really limited his maneuverability in the cap, even in an era where, or in a window where the fact that COVID has restrained revenues and has depressed the free agent market, they still couldn't even be really competitive in that scenario. It's all added up to where they are. But at the end of the day, I thought this team was going to do better. And some of it's been circumstance and bad luck. And, these guys are still showing up trying to win. But, they're so far behind the 8 ball that it's hard to imagine really how they're going to punch themselves out of this, even emotionally.
Patrick, it's interesting you say bad luck. Every team's going to have bad luck here and there, and I think the sample size is big enough. So that's, here and there, you can point to that. Puck goes in off Nate Schmidt, whatever. Blowing 3-0 leads. Look, I don't think we should ever take social media as the be all and end all. And at the end of the day, it's really is a smaller sliver of what the fan base is. Yeah. But I do see this debate going on, and people are not now arguing over whether the team's good or not, or whether the GM's good or not. People are arguing over who's more at fault. Yeah. So I've seen now fire Travis Green. He can't coach. This team can't hold on to a lead. Fire Jim Benning. Yes, all the stuff that you mentioned. The top players are to blame. On the power play, they're just throwing the puck around. They're not getting shots. Yeah. JT Miller's frustrated. He can't do, his body language is terrible. The bottom 6, oh my God, there's so much money invested in them. They're on pace for 21-point seasons and an 80, whatever. Yeah. I see all this stuff. Obviously, we're not in absolutes here. There's blame to go around everywhere. What's the biggest problem? Is it the bottom 6? Is it the star players? Is it the coach? Is it the GM? I know it's all of the above, but which to you has to be fixed first for this team to start trending in the right direction?
Well, I think at the end of the day, who picks the players? I think I've gone to bat for Travis Green. I think he's tried to do what he could with what he has. I think there are some choices he's made in deployment and roster sort of decisions that I'm not the coach, but I think could be quibbled with. But he doesn't have a whole lot of flexibility. This is something I wrote after the game last night. If he really wants to shake it up, the move he has is to move JT Miller to the third line and bring Jake Virtanen in on the second line and sort of cross his fingers and hope it works out. Travis Hamonic comes in on defense, and who comes out? Well, it's Olli Juolevi, who's been fine, but that's it. It's not, this is that everybody has to be A+ for them to be successful, no matter how they're playing, I think is the most damning statement. And that there's just no room for error in this lineup. That comes back to how the team was put together, and that falls in the management suite. And at this point, they're looking at making the playoffs 2 times in the 7 years Jim Benning's been in charge. And even if you give him some leeway for the fact that he was brought in on a job to sort of reset things, restart things, they never wanted to say rebuild. I mean, we all knew that's what they should have done in the first place. We're well past that window, and as we've said, there have been some good draft picks. There's some good, useful pieces in this lineup that were brought in on his watch, but there's a lot of stuff that's not helping the cause. A lot of players who are sort of past their sell by date. And if you'd structured this smartly and thought about this a bit more ahead, you would have an opportunity to bring in younger, fresher players who give you a different look, and they can't even do that. And again, that comes back to management. So this is about management, and in many ways, I think it's also about ownership and the kind of team that they want and the vision they have for what this lineup looks like. And the lack of support, I think, that we've seen. You can tweet all you want, but the lack of support we've seen for this lineup, it's damning. And it's at the end of the day,
it's also embarrassing when you're so vociferous of pointing the finger elsewhere and talk about how great a job your team is doing.
Yeah. And that's what I said last night after the game.
Down the toilet, like immediately after you've done that. Yeah. How are you to blame for this, Patrick?
Yeah, well, that's it, right? I mean, you go back to the list of complaints or sort of what he identified, and he said somehow us talking about the problems was making things worse, and we were pouring fuel on fire, and that misinformation and not things are, and you're basically screaming fake news. Well, what's not true? None of the things that we've reported are untrue. Even the guys who are leading the charge on the speculation, as far as I understand, are, they're using strong sources, that's just, it's such a dodge to try to say that at the end of the day, the fans are frustrated, the players are frustrated. I think we can easily gather that, the coaching staff's frustrated. These are guys that don't have a contract to go beyond this year. That's not a scenario where you dump your effort. That's where you're like, I'm putting my best foot forward because whoever my next employer is needs to know how I did in the toughest of situations.
That's a great point. And I want to go back to your mentioning of, if Jake Virtanen is your great hope to turn things around, well, God bless you. But, you talk about the law of diminishing returns. I mean, this is when you talk about the GM and moves you can make, here's a guy who had a pedigree. It blew my mind to hear people talk about this being an audition for Jake. How many more auditions can you have? No. So the more Jake we get, the less valuable he is. And is that another case where you actually did have an asset with a high prospect that, okay, he's been disappointing, but the more you hang on to him, the more chances you give him, the less you will get from him. I mean, it's pretty clear to me right now, he is never going to fulfill his potential in Vancouver.
No. And I think you have to accept that. I think you're right. I mean, the fear of, he's going to turn into Cam Neely, first of all, I think is just exaggerated. There's always a chance that he turns into a somewhat more productive player if he ends up somewhere else. But the fact remains he's not going to be that player here. And there's a whole slew of reasons I think you can speculate on why. But at the end of the day, he's had a lot of chances. And, other than last season, when some of it was about good luck, in fact, he put the puck in the net, and you can't argue with that.
But then was scratched in the playoffs.
And, and that in the end is the statement, the thing to understand about last season, about how his perception was to the coaching staff. And, at that point, even when they said we're disappointed in him, right, that's when you cut loose. Like, you're not going to get what you could have maybe thought you should get even a year before. But
every game he plays, I see that that returning asset will go down.
Yeah, and it's the death by 1,000 cuts, right? And it's in the end, you retain him. That constricts your ability to make moves in other parts of the lineup. It's not exactly why they weren't able to re-sign Tyler Toffoli, but it's a factor in why they weren't able to re-sign Tyler Toffoli. There was this hope that they'd be able to clear cap room. I don't know how they would have done that. There aren't exactly a ton in front of them, other than buying someone like Brandon Sutter, which they weren't allowed to do, and I think we're perhaps interested in. Brandon Sutter, just related. There's a guy who's actually playing really well. It should be a trade piece. And now, and that's really what you should be doing. You should be talking about what's this next team? How are we going to fix this? It's going to be a hard year or two to actually turn the ship around, but you need to have a plan. You need to show your young players that they have a plan. And I think that's the other thing. I mean, we talk so often about coaches and sort of the way that they understand young athletes and how young athletes are used just by the very nature of the way their schooling has worked and the way their brains have been wired. They're used to being part of the process, understanding what's happening, and they're going to accept the decision at the end if they understand why they've got there. And that's been a struggle, I think. I mean, that's something I've talked about before. That was a struggle for, I think, Willie Desjardins' staff, and Travis Green's a lot better at that. He understands. But I think that also is going to be a problem at management level. The management, in the end, doesn't recognize that. Are they going to be thinking about the future?
It's great that you have that argument about who's more to blame, and ultimately you look at the general manager at this point, because that's he's set the table, he's given you the menu, and this is where you are. But I laugh if you look at the standings. Hey, they're only 4 points out of a playoff spot, but the team in front of them has 5 games in hand. So what is the rest of the season for this team? Like, is there any hope they can claw their way back in? Is there, should they just pack it in and look to move assets? Do you trust the current GM to do that? I mean, this just seems to be at a mess, but they're also somewhat at a crossroads.
I mean, they've got to win 2/3 of their remaining games, basically, to make the playoffs. So...
And you can't even say, well, if they play Ottawa now, because Ottawa's
on a run. Like, that's the thing, is that Ottawa's pulled themselves back into sort of. I mean, I don't even know what they would be.
They've proven they can beat anyone on their given night, and I don't see that from the.
Yeah, and that at the end of the day, the Canucks have played 24 games, and their point percentage is .375. You're asking them to. It's not even, it's just math. It's basic numbers that people can look at themselves. You look at their winning percentage, it's terrible. And they need to they basically need to play pick up points at a rate twice that they've been picking them up at. So, I mean, yes, there's a chance. I mean, I had someone email me saying, I don't know how you can say they're mathematically eliminated. They're only 4 points out of the playoff spot. I'm like, yeah, but they played more games than everybody else. This is the problem.
The team ahead of them would have to lose 5 games in a row just to maintain that 4-point gap.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
So unsustainable.
Yeah, so it's just that's the problem, and so that's the thing. You're just there's 32 games left in this season. How can this
go? What do you do? Do you fire? We've been led to believe that the ownership is not going to make changes during the season, but this is getting embarrassing. Yeah. And if you seriously, if you decide that this is it, and you need to move assets at the trade deadline if you're looking for next year, and do you trust this guy to do that?
Well, no, and to be honest, I don't think that's even fair to Jim Benning. His approach in the end has hit the wall. It didn't work. He's not. His incentives are completely upside down at this point. Okay, great. He's calling every other GM in the league. I mean, of course he is. Just trying to see if there's a Hail Mary pass he can make. But at this point, there's almost no change it's going to make. There's no Pat Quinn style, Jeff Courtnall, Sergio Momesso, Robert Dirt, Cliff Ronning trade. That trade doesn't happen. It's never going to happen again. That's just how, first of all, other teams are better at this than they used to be.
No, but Patrick, if you move a Miller for a first round pick, which is what it cost you, then you're accruing assets for next year, right?
Which is what I was going to say, which is the answer. And I think at that point, at this point, you have to just bite the bullet, accept a caretaker GM. You have a few people around. I mean, Stan Smeel was spotted at the arena last night, so that means he's around. He's a guy that theoretically you could say he's just going to call up and Jim, Stan, your job is to sort of sell what you can, and then we'll hire someone in the summer who has a full-on laid-out plan when there are more options available to us in terms of hiring, as opposed to just someone like Mike Fuda, who obviously has been calling everybody who will listen to say, I think I should be your next GM. It's the way you do this, you need to have an actual plan. And you need to have a plan in your hiring, and you can't just do it right now. I do think that's the thing. You don't want to rush into this, but I think you need to you need to end the relationship. You need to move on. You have a couple people on staff that you could at least assign and say, this is the job to set things up for the summer, and then we'll, basically have it set up for whoever the new boss is.
And the relationship. There you go. All right. Well, Patrick, happy birthday. soon. Yeah. On Twitter at Rising Action if you want to send him birthday wishes. But thanks for your insight. Thanks for watching, everyone. We will endeavor to follow this tragic soap opera that are the Vancouver Canucks.
Thanks, Paul.